This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, welcome everyone to our Parsha discussion on Parsha Vayetzei. For those who were here last week, you know that we talked about Esav a little bit. No need to have been here last week to enjoy today's discussion. But I was thinking a lot about Esav last week and what his role is, right? The Midrash has a tendency to blacken and whiten everything so that there are good guys and bad guys. And I was really trying to read some gray into Esav to sort of understand where his motivations came from. And so I felt that it wasn't fair to not do that with Yaakov as well. So even though I'm trying to look at minor characters or sort of background characters in general, I think that Yaakov deserves a good look this week. And this is a very formative week in the life of Yaakov. At the end of last week's Parsha, Yaakov steals the birthright from Esav. And his father Yitzchak gives him the bracha that Esav wants, and Esav is in a murderous rage. And Yaakov, at the beginning of this week's parsha, he leaves, and he goes to Haran. And we see in the pasuk that he is both leaving Vayetzei, so it's not really like a lech lecha moment like Abraham had, but at the same time he's going with purpose to do something else, which is to build his own family, right? As he leaves, his parents say, please go home to marry someone from a home and not from here, not these local women as Esav did. And so Yaakov flees, but he flees very much with a mission or a purpose in mind. And as we see through the things that unfold, through what happens to Abraham in Laban.
Now it's a mute. Do it again.
In his
no, I did, but
father-in-law's house, we see that he, I was struggling to find the right words, and I'm going to start to share the screen so you can see the source sheet.
No, I can't. I see her lips, but I can't hear her.
Oh no! Hi, Beverly.
I don't know how to get to talk.
I'm just going to mute you again. What else can I
do? It says mute. I don't want.
Poor lady. Sounds like she has some good tech support on her end, so we're gonna hope that she's successful. And I'm gonna share my screen here. So I was trying to think of like what the overarching principle of what I think it is. I think like the shorthand, maybe like the English of it, is to say like Yaakov gets bad karma, or like what goes around comes around. But I'm not sure that I think those are very Jewish things to a way of looking at the world. And so I think I found this Mishnah cited in relation to Yaakov in Rabbi Shai Held's The Heart of Torah book. And I think that he really, it really captures it well. So Bava Kama, all of the Bavas of Gemara deal with property law. And so here there is the status of Adam Mu'ad Olam. We say that people are always considered forewarned. If you have an animal that gores, right, it has to be considered an animal that's Mu'ad, that's forewarned. So an animal gets like a free pass. Well, it can gore once, and there a different set of laws applies to it. Once it gores again, it becomes in trouble. But a person doesn't get that free pass. A person is always considered one who is forewarned. Ben shogeg, ben mezid, ben ben yashin. Whether it was an intentional damage or an intentional one, whether he was awake while he caused the damage or whether he was even asleep, whether he blinded another or broke vessels, he must pay the full cost of the damage. And I think that what that means, right, is whether you hurt someone's feelings on purpose or by accident, whether you steal the birthright for good cause or bad cause, right, whether you trick your father because you think you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, you have to pay the full cost. And I think that what we see here is we see Yaakov starting to pay the full cost of his actions. So I want to look at the neged keneged midah, the things that are coming to Yaakov in this parsha, and to think about what were Yaakov's intentions at the time that he did the things he did in last week's parsha, and how do those things come back to him in this week's parsha, and maybe do they mirror each other in any way? Because I do think that we have a tendency to write Yaakov's behavior as all good because he's the victor, right? Like the history goes towards the winner. And because he's one of our avot, right? We want him to be doing the right thing. But if you look at the pshat of what's happening, it's very tricky, right? So this is last week's parsha here. Just to remind everyone, this is right after the verses that we looked at last year, where Esav comes from the field and he's very hungry, and he says, give me that ha'adom hazera, give me this red lentil stew. And Vayomar Yaakov hishav'a li kayom v'hishav'a lo. He says, Yaakov says, swear to me first. So Esav swore to him. V'yimkor b'chorato liYaakov, and he sells his bechor to Yaakov. V'Yaakov natan le'Esav lechem u'nezirat dashim. Right, then he gives him bread, and he gives him the stew that Esav wanted. Vayochal vayesh v'yakam v'yelech. Right, and so he eats and he drinks, and then he rises up and he goes away. Vayavez Esav et habechora, and thus did Esav spurn the birthright, selling it for just like a soup, right? And the Abarbanel there, the Abarbanel is one of the only commentaries that I could find that came down a little bit hard on Yaakov. Right, most commentaries say, well, Esav spurned it so quickly for a bowl of soup. Obviously, Yaakov was doing the right thing, sort of rescuing the Bechor on some level. Right, and the Barbanel says, had Yaakov been blameless and upright, how could he have dared to tell his older brother to sell him his birthright for a contemptible price, such as a bowl of lentil soup? If Esav is a foolish man, Yaakov should have been a just man and not tricked him. Right? I don't know who I heard. I don't know if that was like an appreciative murmur, right? But I think that there's something to that, right? Esav made a bad choice. There's no question, right? You should not sell something as valuable and important in life as a bechor for a bowl of stew. But the Bravanel says, hold on a second. Maybe Yaakov should have said, Esav, I want the bechor. I think I'm like the man for the job, but eat your soup first. Let's talk about it when you're ready, right? It feels like Yaakov took advantage of the situation on some level. And that is certainly troubling. And in fact, right, we see that Yitzchak, this pasuk here is Yitzchak answering Esav, right? So that happens, and then Rivka concocts this whole plan about how they're going to fool Yitzchak into giving Yaakov the bracha, right? And he dresses up in the skins of the animals that Esav kills, and he says, I am Esav, and Yitzchak gives him the bracha. And then Esav comes in from the field and asks for his bracha, and Yitzchak says, I just gave it to you, right? And Esav is so upset, and he says, give me the bracha. And Yitzchak says, V'yomer ba'achicha b'mirma, right? Your brother came with guile, with trickery. V'yikach birchatecha, and he took your bracha. And I think that there is this strong feeling of like a shame, right? Like this is how we earned our covenantal bracha, by tricking someone, an old man who couldn't see well, and a brother who really, on the face of it, didn't do a lot wrong, maybe didn't act right, but was maybe foolish. And again, I think that here in this week's parsha is where we see it come back to bite Yaakov, right? So this is our week's parsha here. Right, so Yaakov flees from his family homeland, goes to his uncle Lavan's house, finds Rachel, falls in love with her, works for 7 years for her. Come the wedding night, there's a swap, right? We know that Lavan swaps Leah in the place of Rachel. And then when the morning came, and I love this pasuk, I just feel like it sort of highlights the drama or the tension of the moment, right? V'yehi b'boker v'hinei hi Leah, right? When morning came, there was Leah. He woke up expecting to see the love of his life, whom he had pined for 7 years, Rachel, and there is Leah. And he says to Lavan, Ma zot asiti li, halo berachel avadeti imach, v'lama rimitani, right? I was in your service for Rachel. Wasn't I working for her? And why did you deceive me? And we're going to see here that the Breshit Rabbah, which is a beautiful midrash here, picks up on this language repetition. That Yitzchak says that Yaakov took the bracha b'mirma, and then Yaakov uses that exact same shoresh to say, V'lama rimitani, why did you deceive me, to Lavan, right? And there is something that feels sort of just about that. Yaakov, if you're deceitful, expect deceit on the tail end, right? And so maybe I'll read this midrash and then we'll pause to see if anyone has anything they would like to add, right? So Yaakov says, give me my wife, and then it's evening, he took his daughter, right? Lavan took his daughter Leah and brought him to her all night. She pretended to be Rachel, right? Aseh atzma karachel, so a level of deceit already. And then when he arose in the morning, there was Leah. Now in the midrash, Yaakov gets mad at Leah, not at Lavan, and I think it's brilliant. I don't know if it's because it's a better scene. I love that Leah gets to be the one to say, "What are you talking about deceiving?" Because, like, right, a woman speaking in such a powerful way. I don't know if it's meant to make it sort of less important because it's the woman's voice, but here we see the woman's voice, right? Instead of saying to Lavan, "Why did you cheat me?" He says, Bat Haramai, daughter of a swindler, why did you trick me? Lama rimiti oti, right? And she says to him, hey man, what about you, right? You're the trickster. Didn't your own father say about you that you came to your brother in deceit, right? Va'avicha lo amar ba'achicha b'mirma. How could you have the gall to accuse someone else of being deceitful to get something that they want, right? It just feels inappropriate to her, right? And this is someone who was also deceitful, right? She could have chosen instead to be honest and say, hey, it's Leah under here, right? And then Yaakov wouldn't have married her. But she goes along with the deceit. And so there just seems to be some kind of, what goes around comes around piece to this here. And Professor Yair Zakovich, who is a retired professor in Hebrew University, he notes the parallels, like how strongly the text is paralleling, right? In the story of stealing the blessing, the mother, Rivka, took advantage of the father's blindness to replace his firstborn son with the younger one, right? She takes advantage of the darkness of Yitzchak's eyes to push Yaakov, the younger one, in the spot of Esav. In the parallel episode, the father, Lavan, who happens to be Rivka's brother, right? So you've got to wonder how they grew up, takes advantage of the darkness of night, right? Not the darkness of blindness, to substitute his younger daughter with his older daughter, right? He pushes Leah in the place of Rachel. Any thoughts, reactions before I charge ahead? Like, I wonder how, if anyone wants to even just put in the chat, like, how do you feel about Yaakov being the deceitful one and getting the deceit that maybe is like coming for him? Is that a comfortable read of Yaakov? Like, I think the Midrashim turn in, pretzels to avoid this feeling in general. Although, of course, Yair Zakovich is a modern scholarly thinker, but Breshit Rabbah is like the original commentator. Is this comfortable, uncomfortable?
I was always curious about it. And the story doesn't, for the typical person, a lay person who just knows a little bit, they make it seem like Jacob stole something from Esau, and they didn't say too many things about why Esau deserved to lose the blessing, the father's blessing. So I've been wondering it for a long time. I started reading the chapter and the commentaries and learned a little bit about why, though.
Okay, interesting, right? So you're framing it in an interesting context, which is you're assuming that Esav must have done something to not be worthy of the birthright if Yaakov was right to steal it, right? And I think that it's an interesting read, right? I was reading that there was a midrash that the twins are 85 at the time of this birthright swap, which is certainly not how we picture, right? Like I pictured him as like a late teenager maybe, right? But if you think about Yaakov feeling like he deserves the birthright and he's waiting and waiting and waiting to see what happens with his father and nothing happens, right? That finally feeling like he's taking matters into his own hands to get what he thinks will be squandered with Esav, right? As you're saying, Sherry, that like there's something about Esav that would not be appropriate for the birthright. I think that that's an interesting point, right? Somehow it sounds like maybe we're saying the ends justify the means then, right? It's sort of an uncomfortable thing Yaakov did, but he did it for the right reason.
This issue of deceit,
Yeah.
a thread that goes through all of the avot, without exception, in the phrase "Mazos asita," "Mareita." You can again from Avram with Yitzchak, with Yaakov. The only one of the avot, there's no such phrase associated with Ishmael. There's no such phrase associated with Esav. The others, they have the phrase, and later on also.
Interesting. So the covenantal thread is filled with deceit, whereas the ones who end up being pushed out of the story somehow don't seem to have that deceitful tact. Yeah, I think, I was thinking about it a lot today, and I thought maybe Yaakov, it's like when you buy a red car and then all of a sudden you notice everyone's driving a red car. Maybe once Yaakov began to be deceitful, all of a sudden all he could see was deceit. Right? Leah tricked him, Lavan tricked him. We see Lavan trick him. He's worried again later with the sheep that he's not getting his fair share. And it's like, once you grow up in that level of deceit, or you become deceitful yourself, it's hard to stop seeing it. You sort of assume everyone will behave that way because you behave that way. And certainly that would be reinforced, as you're saying, by his grandfather, by his own father. I think we see like a lot of this come up again in the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Yes, Joey, Rachel tricked Yaakov too. I've been thinking a lot about that, right? Do you mean in this story, or are you thinking of a different episode?
This episode, she knew about what was going on. She taught Leah all of their secret sign languages. Yeah.
And why do you think she would have done that, right? She chose to deceive the man who clearly loved her. I don't know if she loved him, right? Text is a little less clear on that, but
I don't know. Like they were all in it together. They all knew. They all tricked him. I don't know.
So I think that it comes down to another one of these instances of like good intentions, bad means. And I think that it comes to this sentence, and I meant to bring one more commentator that I didn't bring, but I'll just tell you about it. Here, so Lavan answering Yaakov's accusation says, right, it's not our practice. Lo ya'aseh kain b'mkomenu latei tzira lifnei habechira. I think, and the Malbim is the one who reads Lavan and Rachel sort of more kindly in this way. I think that they're doing it out of a love of Leah. Right? They don't want Leah to be embarrassed. The oldest doesn't the youngest doesn't get married before the oldest in their customs, in their cultural experience. And I think
But they couldn't find her someone else to marry.
Well, they do say Rachel is right, is more beautiful maybe than Leah. It's a good question, right? Couldn't they have done it differently? Which I think begs the question of Yaakov, right? Couldn't he have done it differently? Like the Abravanel said, couldn't he have gotten the birthright by sitting the whole family down and saying, look, I think I'm really well suited to carry on the covenantal bracha, right? Esav, why don't you take these big fields and plots of land, right? That's what Yitzchak gives him at the end anyway. And why don't like we respectfully part ways here? You do your thing and I'll do the thing that maybe you got by coming out first, but I think it's really my thing. But instead he tricks Esav, right? And Yitzchak, like in a bad way. And so I think here too, right? Lavan and Leah and Rachel could have done something else. They didn't have to concoct this scheme. They could have found another suitor, but they choose, I think, out of like a misguided love of Leah, right? And it can't have been nice for Leah, right? Even if it was meant to make her not embarrassed, we know that she does not feel Yaakov's love. And honestly, it's hard to blame Yaakov. He didn't sign up for Leah. He signed up for Rachel, right? And so you see how like these good intentions, bad choices end up rippling out in bad ways.
Yeah, and then Yaakov had 12 sons and they all lied to him about the fact that Yosef was alive the whole time. Like that, they all tricked him into believing that he was dead.
Yes. Definitely. I did not put that here because I felt I was running out of space, but right, what you're referring to, Joey, is also another, it's like a famous one of those midah keneged midas, that Yaakov tricks Yitzchak with the furs, with the clothes of Esav, and then the other brothers trick Yaakov with the blood on Yosef's coat. And the Midrash there says, oh, Yaakov tricked with clothing, and so he got tricked with clothing, right? Again, we see a place where what goes around certainly seems to come back around to Yaakov in a heartbreaking way, right? You know, I think I might say, no matter what Yaakov did in life, to think that your child has died before you is a horrible fate. And maybe one he is not worthy of, no matter what mistakes he made. But certainly, I think that the text is clear, right? It seems to me that the Torah is saying, look, Yaakov, you went too far in some way, right? It's not right that you got the thing that you should have had the whole time, but you got it in such a terrible way. And I think that that's what guides Rachel here too. The other spot I was thinking about Rachel being deceitful is in the stolen idols scene, which I have to admit I thought was a midrash. I'm a little embarrassed. It actually is part of the shot, right? When they leave Lavan, when they part ways, Rachel takes her father's idols and hides them under her camel seat, whatever that looked like back then. And when Lavan comes through and looks for them, right, she doesn't move and he can't find them. Like he's not going to physically pick her up and take the things from under her. And so she tricks him sort of doubly. She takes what's his and then she hides it sort of in plain sight under his nose. So as Jerry said, right, like no character here seems to be without some kind of poor behavior. The Midrashim there, right, they imagine, oh, Rachel was trying to stop her father from doing idol worship. How valuable, right? But again, you have to imagine, right? Like I always tell my kids, like use your words, right? Assume the other person might do something if you ask them to, right? And here, none of the characters really behave in that way. And so when you look at Lavan, I think we have a choice, right? And Rachel for that matter, but Lavan sort of remains a bad guy and Rachel becomes one of our imahot. We have the choice to say, oh, Lavan is a mean person. And he says, haha, Yaakov, like you were bad, so I'm going to be bad to you. And that's certainly how the Beit HaLevi here reads Lavan, right? He says, how did Lavan say this sentence? He said it, the kinter, I think is how you pronounce it. I looked it up. It means he teased him. And he sort of hints at the fact, oh, in our place, we don't have this minhag, like in your place where you became you replaced the young with the old, to give the young before the old, right? Because everywhere else, Rachel and Leah are referred to by name. And here, Tzira and Bechira seems to sort of hint at that parallel again to Esav as the Bechor and Yaakov taking the Bechor, right? It's sort of echoing that language. So you might do that, but in our place, we don't do that. But the Malbim, and I'm sorry I didn't bring him here, he imagines it more in a loving way, where Lavan says, listen, Yaakov, what could I do? I couldn't leave my oldest daughter to be embarrassed and ashamed that she wasn't married first. I had to, right? He imagines Lavan as a more loving character, maybe in some way.
But as opposing ideas of that is that he had Yaakov work for 7 years, and in 7 years he never mentioned. I know he was leading Yaakov astray. He didn't say it, but then he was leading him to believe that it would have been Rivka.
Yeah.
Rebecca.
Yeah, you might say he took like a sort of cowardly approach to trying to protect his eldest daughter, right? He could have had the hard conversation sometime in those 7 years. He would have risked, right? What would he have lost? If Yaakov had said, listen, I don't want Leah. I don't want to have to work for Leah and then again for Rachel. I'll just leave, right? I'm only 2 years in. I'm not pot committed to this, right? And that was a big, maybe a big risk for Lavan. And so definitely it feels like Lavan led Yaakov on a little bit or a lot because of that. But to think that it comes from like the guidance of a good place is different than the Beit HaLevi, right? The traditional commentaries want to make Lavan and Esav bad, Yaakov and Rachel and maybe Leah to a certain degree good, right? That there has to be this clear differentiation. And I think that the Malbim, understanding like the psyche behind Lavan's lie, it feels a little bit more gray, maybe is what I'm trying to say. And I think, so I found these two beautiful Baal Shem Tovs in learning with someone named Rabbi Zach Trubach. He's also a Chovevei alum like Rav Ari is. He made Aliyah, but he used to live in Ohio. And he wrote a beautiful Parsha blog about the gray of sort of people's choices in this time. And we were talking about this first Baal Shem Tov, and then we learned the second Baal Shem Tov. And I think that they sort of frame everyone's behaviors in some way. So this first one is the one he references in his blog post, and he talks about how it's yadua, it's well known, shahayetzer, the yetzer hara, malbish et atzmo b'mitzvah. And I love that idea. The yetzer hara dresses itself up as a mitzvah, right? Which is to say that when a person, when it says to a person to transgress, it is obvious that one will not listen to it, right? If like a little devil shows up on your shoulder and says, don't tell Yaakov that really you're going to give him Leah at the end of 7 years, or, don't talk to your father because maybe he'll still give the bracha to Esav, right? That a person would say, listen, that's not nice. We have to do the thing that's right, right? And so therefore, lakach malbishat atzmo b'levush mitzvah, right? The Yetzer dresses itself as a mitzvah, because without this, it would be impossible for a person to ever come to sin. So first of all, I think that's just a beautiful idea that no one is predispositioned to sin. We are actually predispositioned to be good people, and that our Yetzer Hara has to trick us in order to do a sin, right? And so if we think about it for Yaakov, right, what is the dress of the mitzvah? Is this idea that Yaakov is the better covenantal child. He's the better fit for carrying out the vision of Hashem. For Lavan, I think the mitzvah is, and Rachel also, I think the bracha is sparing their daughter pain or sister pain or suffering. In this case, right? In the case of Rachel later, it's the mitzvah is stopping her father from doing avodah zarah. But what makes it so uncomfortable? And I think that this is really the key. This is the pear seeing an apple in the mirror on the flyer, right? Is that this idea that Misha ro'eh shum ra b'chavero ha'inyan hu kamo shemistakel b'mir'ah. That someone who sees bad in his friend, it is as though he is looking in the mirror. Im panav metunafim ro'eh gam ken b'mar'eh kach. V'im panav nekiim eino ro'eh b'mir'ah shum dofi. Right? If your face is dirty, you will see dirt in the mirror, in your friend's face. If your face is clean, you will see clean faces in the mirror. The way that he is the way that he sees. Kamo shehu kach ro'eh. And to me, that is Yaakov in this week's Parsha. Everything is he's seeing himself in the mirror. And I think that's what makes it so very painful for Yaakov to be tricked up here, right? Why does he like freak out? I mean, besides the fact that like he did wake up next to a strange woman that he didn't think he was marrying, it's because he sees his own poor, misguided actions in the actions of Lavan, right? Maybe he even understands that Lavan is trying to protect Leah, and he realizes what it feels like to be on the other end of that misguided, poor behavior. And it makes it impossible for him to be with Lavan, because all he sees is his own bad choices. And I think that that's a very powerful idea, right? And then that's this week's Parsha, right? And next week, well, we'll see that Yaakov wrestles with himself through the angel, right? And then he's able to confront Esav again, but he's not really comfortable with himself here. It's so hard for him to see himself mirrored through someone else's actions that he feels sort of incapable of interacting with Lavan. It's too hard for him, and he ends up sort of running away, right? He doesn't even really say a proper goodbye to Lavan. He just leaves. So, I think that that's to say, like, I don't want to leave Yaakov where the Abravanel is, right? I don't want to say that Yaakov was not a just person, because we know that through time he changes and he grows. And I think, bad behavior is not a bad person. It's just bad behavior. But that there's something about
I have a question.
yeah, please, Joey, go ahead. I'm gonna stop the share so we can see.
Like I get that Yaakov like deceited Yitzchak, Yaakov deceited Yitzchak, but he was sort of just doing what Rivka told him to do. And like Yaakov gets all these consequences, like he has to marry someone that he didn't want to, and then like his kids deceived him. But like it doesn't completely add up to me, because it was Rivka's decision to do that. And also, like, if all of this stuff happened, if it was like his karmic debt for deceiving his father, like, I just wonder why Yitzchak deserved that also, like on another level. Why would he deserve to be deceived by his wife and his son?
That's a super interesting question. So I think you're right. And certainly there are a lot of very smart people who grapple with that question of, well, if it was Rivka, why is Yaakov punished? And I actually, Rabbi Held addresses that in his article. He brings a midrash sifrei, so like a midrash that talks about law from Kedoshim, where he says that we may not obey our parents when they tell us to do something morally or religiously forbidden. Now, saying that and doing that are different and hard, right? Rivka is the one who loves Yaakov. They must have like a strong bond. And so to imagine him saying, no, Mom, I think this is wrong, feels like maybe it's unfair. Especially if he's younger, although if he's 85, it's the dynamic shift maybe a little bit. So I think you're right. And I think that Rivka's karmic debt is actually very great. I think the greatest tragedy of Rivka is that in trying to secure her son as the covenantal heir, she ends up pushing him very far away for a very long time. And Rivka dies while Yaakov is sort of in exile. And so he does not bury her. The Midrash talks about that in towards the end of his life, towards the end of Yaakov's life, that he buries Yitzchak with Esav.
But
he is not
that
there.
wasn't. It's not like he was repaid with trickery.
It's not like Rivka was. You're saying,
right?
Yeah.
Like, whereas Yaakov was.
Yes. And the question about Yitzchak, I think, is also just a really good one, right? Yitzchak, I think his whole life is much more a pawn than an actor, right? He is the subject on the altar with Abraham. He's not like an active bought-in partner. We imagine that throughout the rest of his life, he suffers the after effects of that experience. He doesn't pick his wife. Eliezer picks the wife for him, right? He doesn't get to pick the covenantal child on some level. Rivka and Yaakov pick that for him. So I don't know about him. I mean, Jerry, you mentioned that he also has a deceitful thread, but I'm not sure what instance that is.
With Rivka, when he says it's her sister, he also has an occasion where he says that Rivka is a sister.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And he tries.
That's his, no.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is like almost a mimicking of his own father, right? So Abraham lies both in Egypt and in Gerar, and says that Sarah is his sister, not his wife. And then we see Yitzchak repeat that sort of deception. And again, like I think the scales are all sort of wacky, right? Like that's not a very big deception to lie to like a sort of foreign national that you don't know about Rivka being your sister, although it might put her in danger. It doesn't end up really working out for him the same way it did for Abraham, but that's true. There is that. He does sort of engage in that behavior. But you're right. I think these are all big questions, and it's a messy situation, right? Like family is messy. Coming back from Thanksgiving, maybe we all know that, right? And sometimes it feels like some people get repaid in worse ways than others. I don't know. They're good questions.
Yael,
Yeah.
hi. Whenever I come across this story, the question arises, and I asked it earlier this week when we were discussing this very section.
Mm-hmm.
I'm puzzled as to why, when Yitzchak had such doubts about who was in front of him, why he went ahead and gave the bracha, when he obviously had very great doubts that this was Esav. Why did he go ahead? That's such a puzzle to me, unless he was what we call today in denial.
Interesting, right? So assuming that we know that the bracha deserved to go to Yaakov, why did he sort of dig in to giving the bracha to Esav? So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote a beautiful essay about how if you look carefully at the bracha at the brachot, right? There's the bracha that's given first, and that's different actually than the bracha that Yitzchak gives Yaakov before he leaves. Right? We could look at the text, but that's like a sort of more generic bracha, and then he gives Yaakov the covenantal bracha of lands and zera and all of those things. And then when Esav comes to him and he says, "I gave your bracha away, but let me give you another bracha," he gives him a bracha that's not covenantal. Right? It's a bracha of land and power and wealth and food. And so Rabbi Sachs argues that Yitzchak never intended to give the covenantal bracha away. That was a misunderstanding of everyone else in the story, right? That Rivka and then, of course, Yaakov equate being the oldest with having the covenant of land and seed and like progeny. But Yitzchak did not get confused like that. He knew that Esav was not suited to that. And so he gives Esav a totally different type of bracha. And once he knows it's Yaakov, he gives Yaakov the covenantal bracha, meaning that maybe he's not digging in. Maybe he really had a plan to give Esav a very different kind of bracha all along. And that Rabbi Sachs is arguing that's Yitzchak's sort of superpower, is that Yitzchak was able to love in this sort of unconditional way, to say, Esav, I see you. I see that you are not the covenantal heir, but I still love you. Even if you're not sort of who I wanted you to be or who I expected you might have been. And I will give you a bracha for you. And then Yaakov, I love you because you are able to be the covenantal heir. You will continue, he saw them for who they were, which is sort of one of those great ironies because he couldn't see them and he actually got them confused. But it's another great question. I think Judith had her hand raised. Did you have your hand raised, Judith?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I actually was going to refer to Rabbi Sachs and somewhat, as you said, except that it was my understanding, I haven't read this in a long time, so I hope I'm correct, that Yitzchak intended the blessing for Esau, the one that actually got handed to Yaakov, to be the blessing of wealth and power, which was suited to Esau's sort of material existence. And he says the blessing he had intended for Yaakov was the one he gave at the end of his life when he was talking to all 12 of his offspring. And that's the one that talks about the legacy of Abraham and so on. It's just that there's a lot more baggage with it now because of the distance created. But what I wanted to say is, it seems to me that all of the patriarchs and the members of the family, the extended family, Laban and so forth, they have a kernel of distrust that keeps them from speaking honestly on so many occasions. It's like they don't believe that they can get fair or ethical treatment out of, or a compassionate response out of the people they would like to address. And I don't want to speak of cowardice, but really it comes down to that, because as a shy person, I really understand that reluctance to engage in conflict to the point where you just sort of retreat and hide rather than discuss openly and try to persuade. And there's something kind of ironic about that, because God's whole purpose in choosing Abraham and his descendants is that he had the confidence that they could articulate the values that God wanted to promote and teach their children, which is true. But there is this streak, that sabotages.
I like that. I like that a lot, because I think when you think of distrust as sort of the karmic value, right? That's what's going around. It's not being deceived. It's what happens when you are distrustful of the other. But then it's sort of like each like karmic punishment or consequence, it's not that they're meant to be in line with the actions, how bad the deceit was, because it's not really about deceit, it's about distrust. Right. And I agree with you, right? If only Yitzchak and Yaakov and Esav and Rivka had like an honest family communication, how differently could the birthright situation have gone, right? And then if only Yaakov had spoken openly with Lavan and Lavan with Yaakov about, who was getting married first and second and whether they had to be a joint package or not, right? If only Rachel had been honest about her role with her sister and then also with her father and said, listen, like, Abba, I love you. I don't want you to worship idols anymore, right? How different might that deceit have gone? I do think you're right, that distrust and that unwillingness to engage in those hard conversations is what drives these sort of sad stories forward. And I think it goes to that that text from the end that I showed you from the Baal Shem Tov, that is about the mirror, right? Which is that it's very hard to have an open conversation when you feel the dirtiness, the distrust, the sort of deceitfulness in the past, right? Once things start to spin out of control, you don't want to look in that mirror anymore. And if we all came at these things with like a pure, clean face, it would be so much easier to look in the mirror and to talk to people, right? But we know that sometimes in our heart, right, that the Yetzer Hara dresses up in a mitzvah, but it's still there. And on some level, you've got to know it's still the Yetzer Hara, right? And so then it's very hard to look in the mirror and be honest. And that's, I think that our forefathers give us so many amazing things, but I'm not sure that like honesty and bravery are the ones that we get from them. We have to find those elsewhere, maybe. Nelson,
one thing that I would like to add. I've been thinking, Rabbi Sachs often compares the biblical narratives with Greek tragedies or Shakespeare tragedies. If this was a Greek tragedy, everybody would have killed each other. There would be a field of dead bodies, and because people were slaves or their destinies. And they did the difference between the biblical, the Hebrew stories and the Greeks is that God tests the Hebrews and gives them free will. So all along, God, you could say that God was the first one to deceive somebody. He deceived Isaac, but not telling him the dream that Rivka had. There were two nations in her womb, and they would live and fight, etc. Rivka could have told Isaac, she did not. God could have told Isaac, but he only told Rivka. For each point, there is one algorithm node that you have to go one way or another. You have to make a decision, good or bad, sometimes good. But in the end, if next Parsha will tell us maybe an explanation for today's Parsha. So, but free will and subject to all the passions, deceptions, etc. That's what makes the Bible. Then today, all these people, if they were working in a corporation, they would have legal advice, psychotherapy, the human resources would tell them how to do this, but they were testing, they were growing, beginning the whole beginning.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I think the progression of growth, wise as always, Nelson, is really the key here. And we see, I think that's why we see so many similarities in the Yehuda and Tamar story, because Yehuda, the person for whom we are all named, right, as Jews, ultimately takes that responsibility in a much more serious way, right? So Yehuda is one of Yaakov's children, and he marries his children off to a lovely woman named Tamar, but they die one after the other, and so he chooses not to marry his third child to Tamar, in a way that is perhaps deceitful, right? That is the wrong choice. He deceives Tamar. She is supposed to get that third shot at having a legacy, and she doesn't. She, in turn, deceives Yehuda by dressing up as a harlot on the side of the road and lures Yehuda in so that he will end up giving her that heir that she wants. And it all comes to a head at this moment when she's pregnant, right? Because everyone's like, hey, you don't have a husband. How did you get pregnant? Yehuda, as the person who's sort of in charge of her in this patriarchal scheme, says she should be put to death. And when she shows this proof that Yehuda was the one, it's a proof that's like a secret proof that only he would know that she knows. He could have just looked the other way, which would have been very patriarchal in some ways, right? He could have not owned his mistake, but yet he says, I was wrong, she was right. She ends up remaining alive, right? And we know that she goes on to be the, that this line ends in David HaMelech, right? Or continues on through David HaMelech. So we see sort of a repair there, right, of the situation. And I think that that's right, that it's okay that our story starts in a sort of rocky spot, because we are human, right? We are human, and all humans have those struggles. In some ways, I think it makes them more relatable in a lot of ways. They're not above us, the Avot. They're just like us in some ways. And we see that they evolve, and that we learn as a people from our mistakes, and we constantly try to be better. And so that's inspiring, even if right now we're in that painful sort of growth period in our Torah reading. Definitely. So I hope I leave people in a good spot here. I know it's like a hard topic and a sad topic. And I think that there's like such a safety in the black and white, right? Rabbi Trubach wrote in his blog, and I can post a link to it maybe. He says, in real life, villains don't wear black, and rarely do people ride in with white hats on their heads, right? It's very hard to tell the difference between. And so even though it's like more real, and it might be more painful to think of Yaakov as someone who's deceitful, or Rivka, and how come this person suffers and that person doesn't, to me, there's also maybe, hopefully, some kind of comfort or inspiration to be drawn from realizing that everyone's like a little black and a little white at different points, and that we should use good intentions to guide us forward, but not to such a point that we're blinded to the damage our actions can do. And may we all be able to look in the mirror of our friends' faces and see clean, beautiful faces shining back at us. But sometimes it doesn't happen the first time around, and that's okay too.
Okay.
I welcome more thoughts
Amen to that bracha.
Yeah, definitely not an easy one, but I can tell by looking at all of these beautiful faces that there's hope. There's hope out there.
I don't know, were any of you in Shul this past week when Rav Hodi spoke?
Yeah.
No? Yes?
Yes.
Judith?
Yes.
I'm not going to try to paraphrase what he said at all, but there was, I think, part of the general message was kind of a challenge to see God. So it was kind of going to, you know, God was in this place and I didn't know it. And to kind of the challenge of seeing God in the other, in both the people that are your kinsmen or whatever, but also in your enemy. I think, Judith, was there some of that? I don't know. I that's what I at least came away with, and it resonates a bit with what you just said about or about what the, you know, the dirt, it just kind of when you're seeing these other people and seeing yourselves and thinking about God being in us and all that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, right? If we think we have Tselem Elohim in us, right? In hope, then that's what we should see in the mirror of all of our friends. Yeah, Judith.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring that back round to the grand finale of Rabbi Sachs' remarks on the relationship between Yitzhak and the two sons. I don't know that he said it quite that way, but the image in my mind he leaves me with is that Yitzhak actually had the vision to see how the two personalities were complementary, and he was giving to Esav the material goods, and to Yaakov the vision, the spiritual vision. And you know, ideally the two of them should have inherited the earth. They'd be the ultimate power couple working together. And this one error, which you could trace back to, you know, the mother's distrust of Yitzhak, kind of throws a monkey wrench into that, so that they don't really come together until the very end, and then it's just to agree to separate. Now, it could be that they wouldn't have worked harmoniously anyway, but at any rate, if one believes that Yitzhak had this vision of the complementarity of his two sons, of how they would work together, that would be the ultimate example of not only seeing the image of God in the other person, but the idea of the four kinds, you know, at Sukkot, where we always talk about how the different characters, each one of them is necessary to make up the whole of Am Yisrael. This is the sort of primal example of what could have been if we only had that ability to envision the big picture and how it all fits together. That each character trait has its time and place, time for everything, as it says.
Judith, that's so beautiful. I heard something like really similar to that from like a midrash or like some kind of, I don't know where it's from, that was what was supposed to happen. And like in the world of truth, so Yaakov and Esav were supposed to be the bearers of whatever together.
Yeah,
and
must have gotten it from
Esav
somewhere.
was betrothed to Leah, and Yitzchak was betrothed to Rachel, like in this ideal scenario. And so but because of whatever reason, like Esav like didn't do it, I guess you could say, because, you know, he was not trusted by his mother or deceived, or he chose not to, or whatever, that Yaakov had to take on both the character traits of himself and of Esav. And that's why Hashem changed his name from Yaakov to Yisrael, because it's like the combination of like these two energies. And that's why Yaakov married Rachel and Leah, because he had to take on these two energies spiritually of like Yaakov and Esav.
Wow.
And then at the end, where the two of them meet and appear to reconcile, there's imagery there to suggest that Yaakov in wrestling is wrestling with the idea of humbling himself and recognizing whose blessing was whose. And when he parades before Esav and presents him with animals and these huge gifts, and Esav said, what is this? You know, he says, it's not mine. And Yaakov says, no, that it's yours. I have enough. It's like he's admitting that this whole thing about wealth and power, it wasn't intended for him in the first place. He's giving it back symbolically to his brother. I really like that idea.
Beautiful. And Joey, I had never heard that before, but I have
somewhere
to say,
in Rabbi Sachs' writings. Yeah.
oh, this idea of taking on both energies, that's unbelievable. And I have to say, I think there's a bit of a karmic justice there, right? You pretend to be
the story goes on though,
that
that's why Yaakov is buried with Leah in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah and not Esav, and not Rachel, because his spiritual energy, like this unity of Yaakov Esav combo, was his spiritual potential, and that's why he was married to like his like spiritual, he was buried with his like spiritual beshert, but his energy of Yaakov in this world was soulmates with Rachel, and but after he passed and he was in the world of truth, like he wasn't with he wasn't, she was like his earthly soulmate or something, so like they're not buried together.
Fascinating.
Interesting. But I do think that there's like a karmic justice there, because as you were talking, I was thinking like, gosh, that must have been exhausting to have to be two people at the same time, right? To balance two wives, two energies. But that's like what you get, right? If you pretend to be Esav, then you have to keep pretending for your whole life. That's like sort of what I was thinking, you know? That's an amazing story. And like, and what a lot for Yaakov to have to hold all at the same time. Wow, that's wild. Yeah, not simple characters, but interesting, and in some ways that's like what makes us, I think, keep coming back to really look at them, right? If they were perfect all the time, there would be less to think about each year. But this definitely helps us hopefully think about things in different ways.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You guys, I hope you have a wonderful end of your week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you next week.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much for
Thanks, everyone.